Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jenny Alfandary. She is really a quite impressive executive. She recently won CEO of the Year. She's been published in the Institute for Corporate Directors. She got an award from the Institute of Corporate Directors. She's been on numerous different boards, and she's been CEO of some technology companies, engineering companies, and the like. And she's got an engineering background. And we're going to chat today about leadership, about capital raising, about the job of the CEO, about some articles that she's recently had published that talk about all these topics and what it's like being a woman in business. Welcome, Jenny Alfandary. How are you?
I'm outstanding. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor and pleasure to be on your show.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. So tell me a little bit about this award that you recently received.
So, by the way, just ending my first sentence is such an honor to be invited twice. So I will try to be a good guest second time. It was a privilege to be recognized as an outstanding leader in the technology and recognizing all the contributions that was done for the energy industry. I enjoy joining in energy industry 3 years ago, and I serve as a president CEO of a hydro company, and I am right now on the board of directors of oil and gas exploration and production.
And you've got an engineering background?
I have an engineering background. I'm internationally trained engineer, aerospace engineering, one of the most fascinating engineering areas to be in.
Fantastic. And so this award was given to you by the Institute of Corporate Directors?
No, this award was Women in Technology.
Women in Technology.
Yes, I'm very privileged to be a finalist Women of the Year. There was along very distinguished women, and I did win outstanding leader CEO of the Year award.
Fantastic! Congratulations. There's a lot of people that think it's difficult, that there's a glass ceiling for women in business, particularly in STEM industries. How did you break that glass ceiling?
Well, it's a really good question, but it's and we will speak about glass ceiling, but also about glass cliff. It's a new
glass cliff,
a new term that I just learned in audit committee trainings that I attended for board of directors. So how is breaking glass ceiling? It's not easy to break glass ceiling, and I constantly in my life was going for the occupation roles and responsibilities that is not traditional for females: aerospace engineering, Ministry of Transportation, electricity, hydro, oil and gas. It's not an area that traditionally seen.
No, it's not for sure. Yeah.
And I'm really honored to be a part of this. I was one of the few first presidency of hydro companies as a female, but also as an internationally trained engineer. Mm-hmm. And I'm much also enjoying being an immigrant. So I was not born in Canada. I lived in 5 countries.
What are the 5 countries?
I was born in Ukraine. I was raised in Israel. I lived some time in London, UK, and I lived in California before arriving in Canada.
Really? So you really have been around.
I've been around. I have exposure to different culture, to different countries, to different ways of making business.
Do you think that helps you in business to have that exposure to different cultures, different languages, different ways of doing business?
Absolutely. I think it's really contributed enormously.
I agree. I think I've worked in the United States and Canada, and I've done work in the UK and France and the Ukraine, Australia, New Zealand, but not lived in those different countries. I've only lived in 2 countries. So I really think that your experience has got to be incredibly beneficial.
Well, thank you so much. I think overall global and international experience is fantastic to have, but it also really helps you with understanding how companies evolve and how people think. It's completely different mindset, and adding this skill set of, let's say, Tel Aviv is extremely innovative. Mm-hmm. So having this experience of innovation, research and development is hugely beneficial. London is very disciplined and very organized. Also gives this perspective. California is very high risk tolerance. I enjoy this a lot. And also a hub of technology, innovation, and advancement. So it kind of opens your mind to dream bigger, to act bigger, and also take some risk, calculated risk. Ukraine has this determination for success.
Yeah.
So every country.
That's interesting how you describe all these other countries. How would you describe Toronto and Canada?
Toronto is always going for very interesting evolution. And I have to tell you,
evolution.
And I have to tell you right now is probably one of the best and challenging places to be. Because if you will speak about energy is right now in transition. Mm-hmm. So it's a fantastic place to be. Nuclear has so many possibilities and opportunities. We spoke about nuclear last time. It might be, possibly we'll touch about this time. And it's very good to see how overall government supports right now energy and also, but unfortunately we had a huge loss of talent. And to last year, we lost leadership talent to the States and to Europe.
Really? You think we've lost leadership talent?
We lost
because of what? Because they're paying more? Because of COVID or what?
I think it's actually two factors. One of them is our tolerance for risk, that I think is very low. And it really stops innovation. Yeah. It's number one. And also our kind of adventure, how brave we are. We're not that brave, unfortunately. Let's be very straightforward. And second, yes, it is a pay. It's sometimes when you can be paid 2 or 3 times more in the States or in Europe, it's very hard.
It's the brain drain.
And it happens the same with leadership, happens the same with engineering, happens with the same in innovation, in technology. We're losing a lot of talent until we really make a significant change.
Well, we've got a big challenge with productivity in Canada and prosperity. And I think that the recent report I saw is that we're 30% behind the United States in productivity over the last several years. And that's got to be some of the reasons that we're losing good people.
There are no reasons that we will be 30% behind. We are 30% behind. And it's looking only from economical perspective, 30% is actually a very, very low slope to continue on this trajectory of losing. Because the higher is the gap right now, the more it will be in the future. So until we make some strong actions very fast, it's something we will not be able to recover.
We're chatting tonight with Jenny Alfandary, I apologize, Jenny Alfandary, who is a top CEO in Canada. She's won some CEO leadership awards recently. She's on the Institute of Corporate Directors. She's written really quite a compelling article that's been published in the Institute of Corporate Directors journal that we're going to address. And it's a pleasure to chat with her. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in 2 minutes. And we're going to talk about some of the solutions to the problems that Jenny has discussed. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jenny Alfandary. She is a award-winning CEO. She's lived in, I think you said 5 countries. She's emigrated to Canada. She's been focused on STEM, technology, engineering, energy businesses, and she's won recently a top Women in Technology award. She's been a runner-up for Women of the Year, a CEO award. And she's recently written a really interesting article that sort of summarizes some of her solutions and suggestions on how to be successful in business and what we've got to do in Canada if we want to be more successful. Jenny, let's talk about some of the suggestions. I understand the first comment you made was about strategic partnerships. What do you mean about strategic partnerships, and why is that so important? Can't you just do it all on your own?
It's once again very fantastic question. And when we speak about strategic partnership, I'm a big believer in strategic partnership. And let's also look what is overall board of directors responsibilities. Number one, board of directors responsibility is strategy, overseeing strategy and strategy implementation. Number two is all about leadership of the organization, is overseeing, choosing and tracking performance of the CEO. And number three is risk management, enterprise risk management. It's very tied to the strategy implementation. So I started to say that I'm a really big believer in strategic partnership. Yes, of course, you can achieve a lot on your own, but sometimes when we compete, we completely forget what is all concepts of competition and what is all concept of achieving goals. And when you can create strategic partnership, you can go beyond your traditional territory, but you also can explore areas that you did not had access before. So, for example, when I was president CEO of Stereo Power, I reached out to Bruce Power, and Bruce Power was fantastic as a partner, and they immediately wanted to partner on very important goals, on the clean energy, on the net zero emission transition, overall energy transition, on the batteries, on the electrical vehicles and electrical chargers. That would have been not possible for hydro company alone to execute such a large-scale plan. That's only possible when you partner with someone that thinks align going in the same direction and also have the same goals, goals of community prosperity, same goals of clean energy, same goals of energy transition, and also trying to find advancement innovation, how all of this can be achieved. So that strategic partnership element, that's extremely important.
The second one you talked about was building relationships. So, it sounds like there's a lot of cooperation, collaboration that you focused on, partnerships and relationships. Is the relationships within the company or outside of the company? And in addition to that?
I think it's actually both, because I think one of the most important things in a partnership overall is the trust. And this ability to build the trust in a commercial management, in a loyalty, in a ability to execute, in a commitment and determination to be better, to deliver on budget, to deliver on time, is extremely important in building relationship. And this is only possible when you have a track record of successfully executed initiatives.
It's interesting because some people say that culture within an organization is critically important. Other people think, no, you just got to get good people and let them do their work. It sounds to me like you would be more on you got to have culture, you got to have the right people on the bus, you got to have the right team together, and they've got to work well together as a team. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. And also, you remember this, when we started our conversation, you asked me about glass ceiling, and I mentioned glass cliff. And it's very interesting how quite a few leaders speak about culture, and they speak about positive aspects of the culture, and they speak also about negative aspects of the culture. So Microsoft CEO mentions that culture is strategy for breakfast. You can have a fantastic
strategy for breakfast. Culture is strategy for breakfast. Okay, that's interesting.
You can have fantastic strategy, but if your overall culture of organization is not healthy, you cannot achieve this. I mentioned glass cliff, and I mentioned breaking glass with correlation with glass cliff. Quite often, we as women or minority will pick up projects or roles that has very high risk for failure. No one else wants to do them.
Yep.
And that's possibly our opportunity to enter the sector, our opportunity to enter the role. Glass cliff not only have a low chance to success, and no one wants this role, but it quite often comes from the organizations that have very unhealthy culture. So choosing organization is important, very important to understand the cause. And I always choose organization for cause. I join organizations that I believe want to deliver on what is important for me. And I started this trend, lead from the heart. And that's how I was choosing
lead from the heart.
Lead from the heart.
So are you suggesting that there's some companies that give female executives impossible jobs because they want them to fail?
I have heard this opinion.
Really? That's the glass cliff.
That's a glass cliff. I not necessarily agree with that, but I do see that quite often we only can enter the roles
if it isn't a failure, a high failure,
high risk
failure position.
That's right. But here we're using the positive attitude of female. We're very determined. We have high tolerance for risk. We love success. And sometimes female are more even durable.
More durable. Well, there's a great Betty White comment about that I won't repeat, but it talks about how about females can endure a lot of pressure.
I absolutely agree, but I have to tell you, we have to change this. We do need to leverage all the positive attitudes that we have in women, but we also need to leverage all the positive attitudes that we have in international trade engineers,
Yeah.
and I promote and advocate a lot for that because it's different mindset, it's different education, it's different approach.
Not many females go into STEM areas. Why?
It's hard. It's really, really hard to be successful. It's really hard.
Is there sexism, do you think?
It's very hard to graduate. It's very hard to find a first role. It's very hard to stay in the role. It's very hard to get advanced and promoted to leadership position. And I think when I become president CEO first time of a technology company, before I become a hydro company, I got reached out, and a lot of girls actually and women wrote to me, you give me a hope right now. You become a role model. I know now it's possible. And now I become more interested not to be in marketing, sales, or more traditional female roles, but I have this passion and desire for engineering. And now I will go because I know I can become CEO. There are very few CEO of construction, female construction firms, very few CEO of engineering firms. Even technology firms should have seen much more CEO.
I interviewed a CEO of a real estate development company just last week who said that she was one of the only CEOs of a real estate development company, that it was a very male-dominated industry.
Well, I used to have the only woman in the aerospace. I used to be one of the few women in the hydro
what is the key? What is the key to your success in technology-oriented industries where a lot of other females have had challenges?
I love what I do. I'm very passionate about what I do. I do not give up easily. And I do what I preach. I really strongly believe in strategic partnership. I really strongly believe in building relationship. I really think it's extremely important for any organization to set very strong strategy and vision,
right,
and distinguish yourself from this, but also leading from the heart. This humanity, this empathy, this ability to...
Humanity and empathy. Humanity and empathy are not things that people typically think of as traits that CEOs need to have. Strong leadership, is what people would typically think. You think it's humanity and empathy?
I have to tell you that to have an empathy, to have a humanity, you have to be a very strong leader. It's a difference between force and power. When you're really strong leader, you don't need to lead from force. You can lead from power that comes from the understanding female desire, passion, and also desire to help someone to get advanced.
So that's really interesting. What's the difference between force and power?
I have to tell you, through the history, many countries and many organizations actually went for the force. And they will set very rigid rules, even as a country. Let's speak about alcohol prohibition. Or as a company, when they have very rigid rules, what has to be advanced. When you work from the power, you set very strong goals and target and measurement. You're very number oriented, but at the same time, you motivate, you inspire, and you help them achieve the goals. Instead of going through the punishment procedure, you go exactly.
So you're saying the carrot.
You're
saying the carrot is far more powerful than the stick.
I don't only say that. I also say it's more long-term, lasting success, and that builds better culture and organization. Then you not only work for yourself, you're really building the pack. You really building the community, and you really build the team. The only way to do that.
That's fascinating. So it's soft power or incentives, a positive culture over rules and force and a short-term orientation versus this long-term orientation. I think that makes a lot of sense. You're saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and so therefore you really want to build. Not
me, CEO of Microsoft, but I fully agree.
Okay, and you really therefore want to create that culture. You think that partnerships are critically important, and you think that building relationships are critically important, and you think that empathy and humanity are important traits for a successful leader. And if you have all that and the passion that you talked about, anyone can be a CEO.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the the details in regards to exactly how you implement this all. Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jenny Alfandary. She is a top CEO. She's an award-winning CEO, and it's an experience that she's got in different cultures, different businesses, different industries that I find most fascinating, because she's been successful as an immigrant to Canada with an engineering background in technology and engineering-oriented, energy-oriented companies, which is unusual for anybody, but let alone for a female and for a female immigrant. And so I think she's got some really interesting lessons that she's learned over her career that she wants to share with us. She's published it recently in a really interesting article in the Institute for Corporate Directors journal, and she's won awards and she's made speeches in this regard. And so I think it's a unique opportunity for us to chat with Jenny Alfandary, who's here with us today. Jenny, we were just talking about some of the softer issues associated with, or at least what some people think are the softer, well, I think what you think are the more important issues in regards to partnerships and relationships and humanity and empathy. But let's now talk about some of the more financially oriented things. And the first one I wanted to address is an important issue that you said is one of the roles of a board of directors, and you have it in your article, about mitigating risks. Tell me about why mitigating risks is so critically important in life and in companies and in leadership.
Well, it's very important to mitigate risk, because as we started in the beginning of our interview, mitigating risk is very tied to the strategy. And if you want to stand out with your strategy, if you want to build a strategy that will be long-term and successful in long-term, not only 3-5 years, but probably beyond that, and we should target beyond 3-5 years, it's really good calculated system. How do you manage and calculate risk? And quite often when you have to be, they say high risk, high reward, and that's indeed right from the theory perspective. But from implementation perspective, it's very important to have high risk, but calculated high risk. And that means that you really know all the implementation of the risk you're taking, you're planning for the both success and possible alternative routes. I don't say failure, I say alternative routes. Right. And that's very important. But you're also planning how you're going to build additional sources of revenue generation. Additional sources of revenue generation. And I will go back to the point of the strategy and how do you pick up strategy. So you mentioned financial aspect. Financial prosperity is the first responsibility of the president and CEO. As much as we speak about all other items, they only work really well when an organization is doing well. To an organization to do well, you need to have a very strong strategic plan, a very clear vision, and to communicate the plan, strategic plan and the vision, but also to break this down afterwards for more working plan that very tied to the risk management and mitigation of risk management. You know, it's interesting because some people think that the role of a company is just to make money. And what you're saying is that an important role is to make money, but it's not just to make money. It's so that you can have sustainability, so you can have resiliency, so you can fund all those things you want to do. And I think that's key. I've talked about on numerous times previously this concept of ikigai, which is often applied just to a person, but you can apply to it a company as well. That you have to do something that you're passionate about, that you're good at, that the world needs more of, but importantly, that someone will pay you for. And I think that's one of the keys, is that profit and revenue shouldn't be the only objective. Because if that's the only reason, then you'll just do bad things or inappropriate things or things that aren't in a long-term sustainable proposition to achieve those revenues and that profit. But if you realize that you've got to make profit to do everything else, to be sustainable, to hire good people, to build new technologies, to do research and development, I think it creates the virtuous circle that you need. Anyway, so mitigate risks is the issue. And then you want to talk about capital and capital requirements, and that you've got to evaluate that, right? What do you mean by that? Do you mean that you've got to go to NASDAQ, or do you mean that you've got to do a good NPV analysis, or what do you mean by evaluate capital requirements? So it's very important to build company, and it's very important to build company in terms of growth and expansion long term. You mentioned financial success. A lot of companies did financial success in short term,
But not long term.
Not long term. For example, Xerox or BlackBerry, they did a lot of money in a very short period of time, but they only were focusing on a short period of time, and they did sacrifice long-term company prosperity. It's also very important community prosperity. So when when you're very successful financially as an organization, you have more resources to give back to society and more resources to give back to community. Then now in this way, you already create an ecosystem. If you create a very strong
ecosystem,
if you create a very, very strong community around you, you create a very strong neighborhood around you, here comes a talent. Now you have talent that is not living in the community, but would like to stay in the community. And when you create strategy, not to 3-5 years, but 7 years and beyond, you have a big picture perspective all the time in front of you. And it's very important to keep this in front of you where you want to get.
Okay, so I agree with all that, but however, a lot of people say companies, particularly public companies, are completely focused on the next quarter and or the annual results. And you're very involved in the Institute of Corporate Directors, you've been on some public company boards. How do you keep a company focused on the long term when there's so much pressure to make your numbers for the quarter?
You always remember, why do you exist as a company? You always remember the purpose and cause of your organization. And yes, it's very important to balance long-term with short-term, because you do need to be successful in short-term. This particular quarter is important. This particular year is important because it's one of the infrastructure to build this for long-term. But you need to see the purpose of your organization in front of you all the time, to align to purpose. And every time you're making a decision, always remember, does it align with your core values? Does it align with the direction your organization is going? And yes, sometimes it's better to do less this particular quarter, but know that you're going in the right direction. You're keeping true to yourself as an organization, and you constantly remember that you align to your core values, and that in the long term creates very strong, resilient organization with very smart and strong teams.
How do you know as a company what your core values are?
That's overall decision for 3 components: organization itself and its employees, leadership of the organization, and full alignment with board of directors. And
so do you really think companies have core values?
Absolutely. Some of them do not declare them. Some of them have a formal declaration of core values, and they might be completely different what they live by. And you easily can observe your organization. You can easily know what their core values without even anyone in the organization naming them. It's very easy to see.
How do you see it? I've walked into companies and seen mission or vision on the wall, but I don't think I've ever seen core values on the wall.
It should be on the wall. Exactly as the goal and purpose of organization should be on the wall. And yes, vision, mission, absolutely important, but core values should be on the wall.
That's interesting. And so, what do you think? Give me an example of what are some core values for the company that you're currently involved with.
Partnership, integrity, trust, long-term goals, and also community prosperity.
Partnership, trust, relationships, community values, long-term prosperity. Those are good. Those are pretty good. So that's interesting. I don't think a lot of companies really focus on what those core values are. A lot of them, give time and effort, sometimes lip service, to what their vision and mission is. They'll print it out, they'll put it on a wall, but then they'll never read it again. But I like the idea of having core values. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so the next one, you talked about mitigating risk. You talked about evaluating capital requirements. What about monitor and adjust, which was another thing that you had in your list?
I think the only way to achieve any of the goals is to have very, very clear and very sharp metrics, and to have very good system in place to monitor this. As a board director and as the president CEO, I really like to see dashboards. I really like dashboards. Maybe coming from engineering, I like everything organized and everything in a good structure. One of the most important things is start from good structure. And I see when you really constantly see your results, not waiting for the end of the quarter, not waiting for the end of the month. And we spoke about risk management even before we started to speak about financial prosperity, because it's such an important factor of this success, constantly monitoring your goals, monitoring your targets, but also monitoring your culture too. How many of the employees got advanced? How many of the employees stayed with the organization?
Turnover good or turnover bad?
Depends what is happening right now with the organization. It is important to achieve your goals, and sometimes when you see that your talent is not have no more implementation, this particular organization is to go next and not just stay. Yes, it is, but it's also important if someone is really a top producer, enjoys the organization, his views of the core values is the same as you, the same beliefs, that he can have the possibility to stay as long as he can or she can, and also have the possibility of advancement. You rarely see that someone who got advanced, let's say, with 5 years. It either happens with 20 years, and in this case, I quite often think it has a lot of benefits to go to another organization. Yep. Exactly like living in different countries give you different perspective on different mindset. The same working for different organizations
gives you a different mindset. You know, it was interesting. I had an interesting experience working for a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Pattison, who ran 100% owned $9 billion corporation all himself, all owned by himself. He didn't run it by himself. He built a really good team and a really good organization. But he had two different but interestingly compatible sayings in this regard. The number one saying that he said was that he didn't say it, but he implemented that the bottom 10% have to go every year. And he did that with salespeople. He did it with accounting people. He did it with management. Every year he would go through, and he says there's always some people that deserve a different opportunity and need a new opportunity. And so therefore we should do them the benefit of finding that new opportunity. And I was shocked by it, but every year I went back and went through the numbers. The bottom person in out of 10 ended up departing the organization. So he was very tough in that regard. And his attitude was that you don't want people to just hang around doing the same thing for 20 years. They've got to grow, they got to progress, they got to be working. But then he also said, eagles soar and turkeys squat. And so therefore you've got to make sure that you keep those eagles within your organization satisfied, happy, challenged, progressing, promoted, well compensated as well. And so his attitude was that you got to treat the top performers right, and you got to remove the bottom performers.
Well, it's not necessary that you have to let go low to 10%, although it's possible, but you do need sometimes to relocate them to different divisions and different departments. They might be not doing well in a particular role, but the same organization already with knowledge of the industry, they possibly can contribute to different departments. But I really was waiting and really like how did you get for the top 10 performers. I think quite often organizations really focus on the middle, and they completely forgot about 10 top performance, and they kind of even guilty dealing with them because they think that they are too focused on excellence. And I think excellence is extremely important. Excellence
is extremely important.
Excellence as a value, also very important. Excellence as a belief in the role model that you want to promote and set in your organization is very important. So how do you focus on top 10 performance? How do you make sure that everyone in your organization can be in top 10 performance? And how do you leverage those that are already doing outstandingly to the overall of health of your organization to making sure that they also can advance those that are in the middle right now or in the top on the lower 10? So I think this 10% of the successful people in your organization says a lot about the organization. If it's everyone for themselves.
Yeah.
In the competition, if it only you can be successful when you work part of the team, what is contributed this success? So I once again, as you can judge a lot by core values, unspoken core values of the organization, you can judge a lot who are top performance in your organization about overall organization.
You know, I think that that's really true, and the best sort of description of that I've heard, and this may sound a little bit simplistic, but I think it really is very accurate and true, is a quote from Ted Lasso, which is this, syndicated TV series that has been on Apple TV recently about a coach, a football coach from the United States that goes over and coaches a soccer team in London. And he brings in a star performer, Jamie, into the office, and he says, you are 1 in a million, and you think and know you're 1 in a million, but the problem is you're not going to be truly successful until you realize you're also 1 of 11, because to be successful, you've got to realize that you're 1 of 11. You got to work like a team. And I think that really is true. There's a lot of star performers that think they're 1 in a million, and maybe they're only 1 in 100,000, but they think they're 1 in a million, but they don't realize that to be successful, they've got to have an attitude of being a part of a team and 1 of 11. And I love that attitude.
Well, I always say that everything I learn in leadership, I learn from engineering, but I also learn a lot from professional sports. My dad was Olympic team coach, and I grew up on ring in boxing. And I have to tell
you, grew up boxing?
On ring? No, I was not boxing. My dad was
a coach of boxing.
My dad was coach. He's still coach.
Where's he coach?
Tel Aviv.
Oh, really? Wonderful.
He went to the last Olympics, so he took the Israeli team to the Olympics. What I want to say, boxing looks cruel. Environment on the ring looks cruel. It's not. Interestingly enough, boxing has a lot of strategy. Interestingly enough, boxing has the same attitude if you want to be successful in the long term, or you want to win this particular fight at any cost. Sometimes when you winning the fight at any cost, you get injured, and you cannot go long term and survive for the next competition. That's very important rule. But it also teaches a lot about determination. It also teaches a lot about achieving something that is not possible and making it possible. As you notice, I did it almost always in my career. I would set a goal that everyone would tell me it's impossible, just forget this, don't do it. I still did this. And I always put my dreams and goals very high, and then I work hard to achieve them as my own.
And you learned it from your father.
I learned from my father,
the boxing coach.
And I really value this. So I set my goals for myself and for organization very high.
So this article that you published had a few items. So number 1 was strategic partnerships. Number 2 is create relationships. Number 3 was capital requirements, evaluate capital requirements. Number 4 was mitigate risk. Number 5 was monitor and adjust. And you talked about how you got to monitor it. Anything else?
Purpose. Always remember why you're doing this, what you want to achieve, what you want your organization to look like. So every organization needs to have a character, purpose, and core values.
Core values. I like that. Core values, purpose, and you got to be passionate about it. And, it's something that I think is important. Don't do a job. Don't just create a company. Just don't have an objective just to do it. You got to really like it. You got to be proud of what you do. And I think that pride is so critically important. And that pride is what sort of gives you that purpose in life and in the company. Well, that's great. We're going to take a final break with Jenny Alfandary and come back and sum it all up in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with Jenny Alfandary. Jenny is really an extremely impressive individual. She's lived in 5 countries. She's got an engineering technology background. She's emigrated to Canada, and she's been CEO of some energy companies, some technology companies, some engineering companies. She's been the winner of a Women in Leadership in Technology award. She's been up for a Top Women in Management award. She's part of the Institute Board of Directors. She's on public company boards. She's broken that glass ceiling and has done so very successfully. And yet she believes that empathy and humanity are critically important, which is something that is, I think, very encouraging. And we've had a really good discussion of some of those values that she thinks are so critically important in leadership and in running a company. And just to remind you, the first was strategic partnerships. 2 was building relationships. 3 was evaluating capital requirements, and then mitigating risk, and then finally measuring and management. So I think those are all really good guidelines. But she's also talked about purpose and passion and core values. And so, Jenny, I want to finish up by saying, what do you think are the keys to long-term success of a company? You said something about dreams. What do you mean about that?
I think every organization and every leader needs to have very high dreams. And
Have dreams.
Absolutely. I think it almost should be a time on the agenda when you dedicate to dreaming, brainstorming, and trying to make what is impossible possible, and also deciding what is impossible for organization and what is impossible in your own career. Thank you so much for summarizing what I believe and what I do. And I also mentioned to you that every time I choose organization for the cause and for the purpose this organization.
For the cause and purpose of the organization.
Organization, what it wants, what it's actually
that's really interesting, because I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they just interview to get the job. They don't interview the company to find out whether there's organizational fit, culture fit, and what the cause and purpose of the company is, to see if they actually buy into that cause and purpose.
You have to spend with this organization majority of your day, if not all your day. We are CEOs, we work 16, 20 hours some days. It's more important than anything else. You don't see your house or anything, or even your friends as much as you see your friends to work, and that's become your life. And you need to live this life the way you want. For me, in leadership was extremely important to be myself, and to stay true to myself, not only when I'm out of the work, but when I'm as a CEO, I wanted to be myself. And that's not easy to achieve, and not to play a role, but be you if you're in an environment that is not you, you believe in. So yes, that's very crucial.
So it's important to dream. It's important to take some time to think about what your own personal dreams are, as well as what the organization's dreams, aspirations, and goals are. Do you do that in a retreat? How do you do that? How do you do that brainstorming session?
I think you do it all the time. You cannot do it only on a scheduled time. It's exactly as you cannot do strategy on a scheduled time. It's something that you have to live by. You do need to dedicate some time, but you need to live by. And it's only if you dream big, you create something bigger than current situation. And if you look at all the leaders of all the times that were extremely successful, first of all, they did dream big, but they always wanted to achieve something that did not look possible. And we spoke about glass ceiling and glass cliff. But on the positive side, why did they do glass cliff roles? And I not always, but almost always took glass cliff roles, because on the positive side, it's making impossible possible.
Right. Make the impossible possible.
Take an organization that was in a particular role and completely grow it to the next 7 levels, not to the next level. That's a standard definition of leader to do next level. But when you really want to grow, expand the company beyond what was originally possible, that's a really strong leadership. Otherwise, it's standard management. And do you want to be, as president and CEO, standard manager? I don't think so.
This has been a very inspirational conversation today, Jenny. Thank you so much. I want to ask you one last question, if I could, before we go. And if you don't want to answer this, don't answer it. But I have to ask you it. You said you have to be yourself. Some females think that to be successful leaders, they've got to be like a man. They've got to be masculine. They've got to be aggressive. They've got to be like a man. And they cannot be feminine. They cannot be authentically female. But you've achieved that. How have you done that?
Well, I started my way completely trying to hide, to have any side of the being female. I would wear military jacket. I will color my hair black. I will never wear any makeup, no dresses, construction boots, and all of that. But then I understood that being strong is actually to show vulnerability and show through yourself. And that's kind of luxury of being strong and being strong is not easy. Sometimes you do stay alone in the top, but you stay alone with trying to do right thing. But it's still extremely important to strongly stick to who you are.
Be authentically you.
Be authentically you. Trying to do right thing at any cost. Sometimes cost to do right thing is extremely expensive. And only remembering that you want to advance and become better than you were a day before, and you only compete with yourself.
Jenny Alfandary, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure and honor. And I think we've all learned a lot from listening to your list of items to be successful as a leader in a company, but also I think that your inspiration on having dreams, on having core values, and on being authentically yourself, whether in leadership or any position in the company. I think it's so critically important. That's our show for tonight. Thank you, Jenny, for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. My podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.